Most people think New York is just skyscrapers, traffic jams, and Times Square, but hidden inside this one state are mountains that are still growing, rivers that flow backward, waterfalls taller than Niagara, and an underwater canyon so massive it rivals the Grand Canyon itself. In fact, New York contains so many bizarre landscapes that geologists often describe it as multiple worlds packed inside a single border. Today, we're counting down 30 geography facts about New York that most people get completely wrong. And trust me, some of these sound so unbelievable they shouldn't exist, starting with a world-famous landmark that's been quietly running away for thousands of years. 30. Niagara Falls is slowly escaping. Everyone knows Niagara Falls. Millions of visitors travel there every year to watch one of the most powerful waterfalls on Earth. But here's what most people never realize. The waterfall you're looking at today isn't where Niagara Falls originally began. Since the end of the last ice age, the falls have carved their way nearly 7 miles upstream. For more than 12,000 years, rushing water has been grinding away at the softer rock beneath the cliff edge. As sections collapse, the falls slowly move farther inland. Before hydroelectric projects reduced the flow, Niagara was retreating at almost 3 feet every year. Think about that for a moment. One of the most famous landmarks on Earth has spent thousands of years quietly relocating itself, and even today, it's still moving. 29. The city built inside waterfalls. Most cities are built around rivers. Ithaca was built around waterfalls. Tucked into New York's Finger Lakes region, this small city contains more than 150 waterfalls within just a few miles of downtown. Ancient glaciers carve deep gorges through layers of shale and sandstone, creating a landscape that feels more like a national park than a city. Some of those canyons cut directly through Cornell University's campus, where walking trails wind between towering rock walls nearly 100 feet high. The city's famous slogan is, "Ithaca is gorgeous." It sounds like a clever joke, but geographically speaking, it's completely accurate. 28. New York's hidden waterfall is taller than Niagara. When people think of giant waterfalls, Niagara usually gets all the attention, but New York hides another waterfall that quietly dwarfs it. Taughannock Falls plunges 215 feet in a single, uninterrupted drop, nearly twice the height of the American side of Niagara Falls. Surrounding the waterfall is a massive natural amphitheater carved by ancient glacial meltwater, with towering cliffs rising hundreds of feet above the gorge floor. Despite holding the title of the tallest single-drop waterfall in the northeastern United States, many New Yorkers have never even heard of it. Niagara may be the celebrity, but Taughannock holds the record. 27. The Forgotten Niagara. When people talk about New York waterfalls, one name dominates the conversation: Niagara. But just north of Albany sits another waterfall that was once nearly as famous. Cohoes Falls stretches more than 1,000 feet across the Mohawk River, creating a massive curtain of water that can rival some of North America's most impressive cascades. In the 1800s, tourists traveled from around the world to see it. Poets wrote about it, artists painted it, then industry arrived. Water was diverted for mills and power generation, and the falls slowly disappeared from the public spotlight. Today, most New Yorkers have never heard of a waterfall that was once considered Niagara's biggest rival. 26. The lake that refuses to mix. Most lakes work like giant mixing bowls. Wind, temperature changes, and seasonal shifts constantly stir the water. Green Lake doesn't. Near Syracuse sits one of the rarest lakes in North America, a meromictic lake whose layers remain permanently separated. The upper water contains oxygen and supports life. The deeper water doesn't. For more than 10,000 years, the bottom layer has remained isolated from the surface. That means some of the water sitting at the bottom of the lake hasn't mixed since the Ice Age. Imagine standing on a shoreline while ancient water from a completely different world sits directly beneath your feet. Because that's exactly what's happening here. 25. These lakes go below sea level. When people hear lake, they usually picture something sitting above sea level. The Finger Lakes break that rule. Thanks to incredibly powerful glaciers, some of these lakes were carved so deeply that their bottoms actually extend below sea level. Seneca Lake is the most dramatic example. While its surface sits hundreds of feet above sea level, its deepest point drops far below it. In other words, if the water suddenly disappeared, parts of the lake bed would sit lower than portions of the Atlantic Ocean. The glaciers didn't just carve valleys here, they drilled into the landscape like giant ice-powered excavators. 24. A place that creates its own weather. Most places experience weather. Tug Hill helps create it. Located east of Lake Ontario, this plateau receives staggering amounts of snow every winter, often between 200 and 300 inches. The reason is geography. Cold Arctic air sweeps across Lake Ontario, collecting moisture along the way. When that air crashes into Tug Hill's higher elevation, it rises rapidly and unloads huge amounts of snow. The plateau essentially acts like a giant atmospheric trap. In one famous storm, more than 6 feet of snow fell in less than a week. Tug Hill doesn't simply receive lake-effect snow, it helps manufacture it. 23. New York used to be Arctic oceanfront. Imagine standing in northern New York and watching beluga whales swim past. As strange as that sounds, it actually happened. After the last ice age, massive glaciers had compressed the land so heavily that ocean water flooded into what is now the Champlain Valley. The result was a temporary inland sea known as the Champlain Sea. For thousands of years, Arctic marine animals, including whales, seals, and walruses, lived hundreds of miles from today's coastline. Then something remarkable happened. Once the glaciers melted away, the land slowly rebounded upward, the connection to the ocean disappeared, the sea vanished, and the whales were replaced by forests, farms, and small towns. Whale fossils found throughout the region prove this incredible chapter of New York's history was completely real, and somehow an Arctic Sea isn't even the strangest thing New York's landscape has produced, because the next fact involves mountains that don't behave like mountains at all. 22. New York's mountains broke the rules. Most mountain ranges form long chains. The Adirondacks didn't get the memo. Instead of stretching in one direction like the Appalachians, the Adirondacks form a giant dome rising from the landscape. From above, they look more like a massive geological bubble than a traditional mountain range. The region contains 46 peaks above 4,000 feet and covers an area larger than several U.S. states. What makes it even stranger is that the Adirondacks are still rising today. Deep forces beneath the Earth's crust continue pushing the dome upward. While many mountain ranges are slowly wearing away, New York's most famous mountains are still climbing toward the sky. 21. The Thousand Islands are actually mountain peaks. The Thousand Islands region looks like a random collection of islands scattered across the St. Lawrence River. It isn't. Those islands are actually the surviving peaks of an ancient mountain system. Long ago, a granite ridge connected the Adirondacks to the Canadian Shield. Over time, water flooded the lower areas, leaving only the highest points visible above the surface. Today, more than 1,800 islands dot the river. But what you're really looking at isn't an archipelago, it's a drowned mountain range. The valleys disappeared beneath the water, the peaks stayed behind, and together they created one of the most beautiful landscapes in North America. 20. The Catskills aren't actually mountains. The Catskills look like a mountain range, they feel like a mountain range, but geologically, they aren't one. What you're really seeing is the remains of an enormous river delta that formed roughly 375 million years ago. Back then, ancient rivers carried huge amounts of sediment from long-vanished mountains into a shallow inland sea. Over millions of years, layer after layer piled up, creating a massive plateau thousands of feet thick. Then glaciers arrived. They carved valleys, sharpened ridges, and sculpted the landscape into the peaks we see today. So while the Catskills may look like mountains, they're actually the weathered skeleton of a prehistoric river system. 19. A tropical reef. Hanging above New York. It's hard to imagine tropical coral reefs in upstate New York belonging in the same sentence. Yet one of the state's most impressive cliffs was once exactly that. The Helderberg Escarpment rises dramatically above the surrounding landscape near Albany. Inside those limestone walls are countless fossils from a warm tropical sea that covered New York around 400 million years ago. Corals, ancient shellfish, sea lilies, even primitive fish, everything preserved in stone. Today those fossils sit more than 1,000 feet above sea level. A tropical reef somehow ended up in the sky. 18. New York's half-billion-year-old canyon. At first glance, Ausable Chasm looks ancient. The truth is more complicated. The rock surrounding the canyon is roughly 500 million years old. The canyon itself is incredibly young. The sandstone walls were formed in an ancient coastal environment long before dinosaurs existed. In fact, ripple marks from prehistoric tides can still be found preserved in the stone. But the dramatic gorge cutting through those rocks was carved only about 10,000 years ago, when glacial meltwater rushed through the region after the Ice Age. Ancient rock, young canyon. Together they create one of New York's most spectacular landscapes. 17. The mountains are still recovering from the Ice Age. The Ice Age may be over. The Adirondacks haven't forgotten. Thousands of years ago, glaciers more than a mile thick covered much of New York. The weight was so enormous that it physically pushed the Earth's crust downward. When the ice finally melted, the pressure disappeared, the land began slowly rising back up, and it's still happening today. Geologists call this process glacial rebound. Think of it like a giant mattress slowly returning to shape after a heavy object is removed. The Adirondacks are literally still recovering from an event that ended before human civilization existed. 16. One rainstorm can reach 3 different oceans. Most mountains send water in one direction. The Adirondacks are different. Depending on where a raindrop lands, it can end up taking 3 completely different journeys. Some water flows south into the Hudson River and eventually reaches the Atlantic Ocean. Other water travels north through the St. Lawrence River toward the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and some heads west into the Great Lakes system before eventually reaching the Gulf of Mexico. A single storm passing over the Adirondacks can send water toward multiple corners of North America. Very few places on the continent can make that claim, and if you think that's unusual, the next fact involves one of the Great Lakes doing something none of the others can. 15. The Great Lake. That's barely deep Lake Erie often gets overlooked because it's the smallest Great Lake by volume, but what makes it interesting is just how shallow it is. Its average depth is only about 62 feet. Even its deepest point remains above sea level. That makes Erie the only Great Lake where the lakebed never drops below the ocean's baseline. Because it's so shallow, Erie warms faster in summer, freezes more easily in winter, and supports huge amounts of aquatic life. It may be the least dramatic-looking Great Lake, but it's easily the most unusual. 14. The Finger Lake. That broke the pattern. Look at a map of the Finger Lakes and you'll notice something. Most of them run in neat parallel lines. Then, there's Keuka Lake. Instead of following the pattern, it splits into 2 branches, forming a giant Y shape. The reason goes back to the Ice Age. 2 separate glacier tongues carved 2 separate valleys. When those valleys merged, they created one of the strangest lake shapes in America. From above, it looks almost like a giant tuning fork pressed into the landscape. Nature usually likes patterns. Keuka Lake decided to do its own thing. 13. A lost river system. Built half. The state millions of years before New York existed, a gigantic river system dominated the region. Geologists call it the Catskill Delta, and it was enormous. Sediment carried by this ancient river spread across huge portions of what is now New York and beyond. Over time, those deposits hardened into the bedrock that underlies much of the state today. Many of New York's cliffs, valleys, farms, and forests ultimately owe their existence to this vanished river. The river disappeared hundreds of millions of years ago. Its fingerprints are still everywhere. 12. New York's traveling mountains. Most mountains form where they currently stand. The Taughannock Mountains didn't. Around 450 million years ago, a massive tectonic collision shoved an entire slab of ocean floor rock westward across the landscape. Imagine a piece of Earth's crust being pushed for miles and deposited somewhere completely different. That's essentially what happened. Geologists call these displaced formations allochthons. The result is a mountain range made from rock that originated far away from its current location. In a very real sense, the Taughannock Mountains moved into New York. 11. The 50-mile wall of ancient lava. The towering Palisades cliffs overlooking the Hudson River might look like ordinary rock. They're actually the remains of a gigantic lava intrusion. Around 200 million years ago, molten rock forced its way between existing layers underground. As it cooled, it hardened into a massive slab stretching roughly 50 miles. Over time, erosion stripped away the softer surrounding rock, exposing the dramatic cliffs visible today. The vertical columns seen along the Palisades formed as the lava slowly cooled and contracted. Most people see a scenic cliff. Geologists see one of the largest exposed lava formations in the eastern United States. And now we reach the part where New York's geography stops being merely strange and starts feeling almost impossible. Because next, we'll look at a river that flows backward, a buried river beneath Manhattan, and an island that's literally a giant pile of glacier debris. 10. The river that can't decide which way to flow. Most rivers have a simple job: flow downhill toward the ocean. The Hudson River has other ideas. For nearly 150 miles, the Hudson behaves less like a river and more like an arm of the Atlantic Ocean. Twice every day, incoming tides push ocean water upstream, reversing the river's surface flow. Then, the tide changes, and the water heads back toward the sea. This strange behavior earned the river its Native American name, Mehicantuck, the river that flows both ways. For thousands of years, the Hudson has been caught in a daily tug-of-war between freshwater flowing south and ocean tides pushing north. Most rivers choose a direction. The Hudson changes its mind every few hours. 9. Manhattan sits on a drowned fjord. When people think of fjords, they think of Norway. Few realize New York has one too. During the last ice age, massive glaciers carved a deep U-shaped valley through what would eventually become the Hudson River. When the ice melted and sea levels rose, ocean water flooded the valley. The result was a fjord, a real one. The deep water surrounding Manhattan allowed huge ships to sail directly into New York Harbor, helping transform the city into one of the world's greatest trading centers. Without that glacier-carved channel, New York City's history might have looked completely different. One of the world's most famous skylines exists because an ancient glacier dug a giant trench through the landscape. 8. The river hidden beneath Manhattan. Most cities build over streams. New York buried one alive. Beneath the streets of Greenwich Village flows Minetta Brook, a stream that once crossed open countryside before Manhattan expanded northward. As development spread, the brook disappeared beneath roads, buildings, and underground pipes, but it never stopped flowing. Even today, the hidden waterway continues moving beneath the city. In some areas, its presence has caused flooding and foundation issues for centuries. If you've ever walked along Minetta Lane or Minetta Street, you've been following the original path of a river that still exists, you just can't see it. 7. Long Island is a giant pile of glacier debris. Long Island isn't really an island in the traditional sense, it's a monument left behind by glaciers. Thousands of years ago, enormous sheets of ice pushed southward across the region, bulldozing rocks, gravel, sand, and soil ahead of them. When the glaciers stopped advancing, they dumped those materials into huge ridges called terminal moraines. Those ridges still define Long Island today. Everything from its rolling hills to its beaches traces back to the final moments of the Ice Age. One of America's most densely populated places is essentially a gigantic pile of leftover glacier rubble. 6. Long Island Sound was once a giant lake. Today, Long Island Sound is connected to the Atlantic Ocean, but not that long ago it was completely different. During the Ice Age, glaciers blocked the region and trapped fresh water behind them. The result was a massive glacial lake stretching across what is now Long Island Sound. For centuries, it remained isolated. Then the ice retreated, ocean water rushed in, and the freshwater lake slowly transformed into the tidal waterway we know today. The boats sailing across Long Island Sound are floating above what was once a giant inland lake. And somehow, all of that happened within the last 12,000 years. But the next few facts reveal something even harder to believe. Because New York's coastline is far longer than most people think, its most famous river continues underwater for hundreds of miles, and one waterfall, literally, has fire burning behind it. 5. New York's coastline is way longer than you think. Look at a map and New York doesn't seem particularly coastal. But maps can be deceiving. Once every harbor, bay, creek, inlet, marsh, and island shoreline is measured, New York's tidal coastline stretches for more than 1,800 miles. That's over 14 times longer than the state's direct Atlantic coastline. The reason is simple: New York's shoreline is incredibly complicated. From Long Island's twisting bays to the maze of waterways surrounding New York City, the coast folds in on itself again and again. The result is a state with far more shoreline than most people would ever guess. 4. The Hudson has a secret second half. Most people think the Hudson River ends at New York Harbor. It doesn't. Far out in the Atlantic Ocean, the river continues as the Hudson Submarine Canyon. This enormous underwater trench stretches hundreds of miles across the ocean floor and plunges more than 10,000 feet deep. During the Ice Age, sea levels were dramatically lower, allowing the Hudson River to carve directly across exposed land far beyond today's coastline. When sea levels rose, the canyon disappeared beneath the ocean. The river's hidden extension remains there today, invisible from the surface, larger than most people can imagine. 3. But the waterfall, with fire behind it. Some places sound too strange to be real. Eternal Flame Falls is one of them. Hidden inside Chestnut Ridge Park near Buffalo is a small waterfall with a natural flame burning behind it. The fire is fueled by natural gas, seeping from underground shale deposits. As long as the gas continues escaping, the flame can keep burning. Water pours down, fire burns behind it, and somehow both exist in the same place at the same time. It looks less like geology and more like something from mythology, yet it's completely real. 2. 4 forces built an entire state. At first glance, New York's landscape feels random. It isn't. Almost everything in the state can be traced back to 4 powerful forces. Glaciers carved the Finger Lakes, Long Island, and the Hudson Valley. Ancient oceans left behind fossil reefs, limestone cliffs, and layers of sandstone. Volcanic activity created the Palisades, and tectonic collisions shaped mountain systems like the Adirondacks and Taughannock. What makes New York remarkable isn't just the variety of landscapes. It's the fact that so many different geological stories happened in the same place. Few states can match that level of diversity. Sonderbach an Bobenbentorzen Obat Dunsain Bisman Oban. New York isn't a state, it's a continent in disguise. After everything we've covered, one thing becomes clear. New York isn't easy to categorize. Within a single border, you'll find drowned mountain ranges, glacier-built islands, waterfalls taller than Niagara, tropical fossil reefs, ancient lava formations, tidal rivers, buried streams, underwater canyons, Arctic sea fossils, and mountains that are still rising today. Most states are known for 1 or 2 defining landscapes. New York contains dozens. That's why geography experts often consider it one of the most diverse states in America. The deeper you look, the stranger it becomes. And the craziest part? We've only scratched the surface. There are hundreds more incredible geological stories hidden across New York that most people will never hear about. If one of these facts surprised you, let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed exploring the hidden geography of New York, make sure to subscribe for more incredible places, forgotten history, and unbelievable facts from around the world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.